want to talk about is looking at a system for preventing social and behavioral and emotional difficulties for children as early as we can, so that they can be as successful as possible in school. So Marlene and I and counselors and school psychologists last spring started talking about, is this something we can do? And we want to talk to you about it tonight because we want to pilot it at Chapman. One of the things that we're noticing, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, is that the emotional needs and the behavioral needs are increasing at a rate that we think is, we know is more rapid than we would like. We're seeing a big difference in emotional, social, and behavioral difficulties with children today than we did 10 years ago, even more than we did 5 years ago. And that's not specific to Cheshire. That's a trend across Connecticut and nationally. So we want to see what we can do to kind of get a better control of the situation and slow down the increasing rate of the difficulties that we're seeing with children. So how do we go about doing this? One of the things that we think we need to do is to come up with a better plan for prevention. One of the things that we know needs to happen in order to prevent difficulties is to do a screening of children to find out who's likely to have difficulty. And it's so that's not a earth-shattering concept. It's not cutting edge to do screenings, but this area of social, emotional, and behavioral screening is not something that's typically been done. In fact, it's not done in schools, and it's also not done by pediatricians. Although pediatricians are starting to do some screening in this area at annual checkups, depending on your pediatrician. Have you noticed if your pediatricians are asking questions about stress or anxiety or sadness? Yeah. But we want to look at how we can incorporate screening in this new area with our children. So, the basic reason is we do a lot of screening in education and in healthcare. So we screen all children each year to take a look at how are they doing with their reading skills and their math skills. So why do we do that? You teachers can't answer. Sure. Why do we screen for reading and math with children in kindergarten and first grade and second grade and third grade and fourth grade?
Make sure we're teaching them properly.
We want to make sure we're teaching them. What else do we want to find out?
Make sure they're learning to know how to read.
Yeah. So we want to know, is there anyone present in this classroom who is struggling to make progress? Because we know if we recognize it sooner rather than later, we can intervene, and we can intervene more efficiently the earlier on that we realize that there's some difficulty. We do vision and hearing screenings in school. So why do we do vision and hearing screenings in school?
So they're aware of challenges.
Right? You think it's hard to be successful in school if you're not hearing what's being said in the classroom? Yeah, of course, definitely. Or if you can't see what's on the page or what's on the smart board. If you can't see what's on the page, or if you can't see what's on the smart board or the whiteboard or the chalkboard, is school going to be a bit more challenging? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is it going to be, will that put you at risk for not making progress in school?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So that's why we screen for it. So we screen to see, are you keeping pace with reading? We screen to see, can you see? We screen to see, can you hear well enough? Because we know if you can't do those things, you're going to struggle. Well, now we want to add in screening to see how children are doing emotionally. And we know if we find these students earlier, there's two things. One, as I said, the earlier we recognize the problem, the easier it is to intervene. The other piece is if we don't recognize a problem, we can't get a child, a student, connected with the services that he or she needs. Right? We can't say, here's who you need to work with on our team here at school to help you. So we have resources, but if we don't connect people who need the resources with the resources, then it's not very good. The other piece is we want to make sure that the resources that we have, those people, those staff members are working with the right students at the right time. Right? So if we're not accurately identifying who needs the support, then we have people working with children, and maybe they're not the neediest people, or maybe they're not the ones who need the most support. And the only way we can do that is by gathering information and gathering data to know who needs it. So we want to be able to more accurately set the priority for who do we need to be working with and who do we need to be supporting. Does that make sense? Okay. Do you want to add anything about that, Marlene?
No, perfect.
So when we talk about taking a look at how we can screen students who have emotional or behavioral or social difficulties, one of the reasons we want to do it is we know that if students are struggling emotionally and it's hard for them to get through a school day, they're not going to be available to learn reading skills, writing skills, math skills, interpersonal relationship skills, play skills. And that's going to create a barrier to making good progress academically. And one of our goals is to reduce barriers to student progress and find ways that we can help students get the support that they need when they're facing these struggles. So we think it's sort of inefficient to check to see if students' reading skills are coming along and math skills are coming along and vision and hearing are good, but not take a look at, are you very anxious? Are you having difficulty coping with stressors in your family situation? Are you having difficulty regulating your emotions? Are you very sad most of the time? Is it hard for you to sleep? Is it hard for you to eat? And all of those things can interfere with how you're doing in school. It seems pretty short-sighted when we know that emotional and social and behavioral development has such an impact on your ability to sit in school and learn what we're trying to teach you. So that's why we want to start taking a look at it. So there's a couple different ways to do screenings. One is these community level screenings where we take a look at what's happening in a town or in a city and see what's the well-being of the young people in a particular community overall. And that can give you a good reading on what does a community as a whole need. Fortunately, Cheshire Youth Services has done a community-wide screening this year where nearly almost every student in grades 7 through 12 took a survey about emotional, social development, resiliency factors, which they call assets, but they're resiliency factors, and risk factors that are in play. So later this spring, Cheshire Youth Services, in conjunction with the Board of Ed, is going to present these findings of what's basically the state of young people in Cheshire. So that's going to be very helpful. The next piece that we want to do is, and that was done anonymously, so we don't know who's who in that survey. Now we want to start taking a look at how are children doing at the individual level and screen students in our schools to find out who might be struggling emotionally, socially, and behaviorally. What is involved with this is getting parents to say, it's okay for my child to participate in this type of a screening. And so you all let your children participate in vision screenings and hearing screenings and reading screenings and math screenings. And now we're saying we would like parents to let their children participate in screening for how they're doing emotionally, socially, and behaviorally. The way it works is no adult in the school will ask your child any questions or will have your child fill out any forms or surveys or anything like that. The way the screening system works is that classroom teachers, as at various points in the school year, as they get to know the children in their classrooms, will consider who are children that they think might be struggling. And it's very simple screening. It's called a multiple gated screening procedure, where we talk to the teachers about who are children who might be struggling with having difficulty coping with stressors and present as having excessive worry or excessive sadness or those types of concerns. And all a classroom teacher does is say, these are the 3 students in my classroom, or I'm sorry, the 5 students in my classroom who I have the most concerns about when it comes to things like worry or sadness. And then we also ask them, who are the children that you have the most concerns about when it comes to being disruptive, not following rules, not being able to control their impulses and do what they're supposed to when we ask them to. And they say, these are the 5 students who I have the most concerns about. And then, once they pick 5, they rank them 1 through 5. And then for the top 3, they'll fill out a questionnaire of about 20 items for each of those students. And then those questionnaires get scored. And if those students who the questionnaire is completed on hit a particular cutoff score, then we say, oh, this is a child who might need more support. And if that occurs, then we call the parents and say, your child participated in this screener and had some elevated scores. We'd like to talk to you about it and discuss with you options for services that we can provide to support your child here at school.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If this is an opt-in program, so say only 5 parents, it kind of throws the curve off, doesn't it?
Yeah. If we only have 5 parents, we can't do it.
Okay.
The term for this type of program, just like we do with vision and hearing and reading and math, is it's a universal screener. So it really is only effective if we can screen probably at least 80% or so of children.
Okay.
Yeah.
So normally in schools, the teachers are already aware of issues that are going on in the classroom. How is this program different than what teachers have already been doing over the last few decades?
What happens is this gives us a systematic and consistent way for monitoring how children are doing in this area of how they're doing emotionally and behaviorally. So this system gives us a focused time for every teacher to consider every child in the classroom and think specifically about a set of behaviors that they need to focus in on for all the children in the classroom. And then they can make their judgment based on a set of criteria rather than based on their own intuition or their own experience or their own context of what it means for someone to be struggling or not struggling. It also gives us the opportunity to quantify how a child is doing with some clear data rather than anecdotally that a teacher notices some concerns. And so when we have a child who we start providing services to, we can go back and collect similar data after they've been getting some support for 2 months or 3 months and gather the same type of data and see if there's been any improvement.
So if you have a student who, let's say that they're disruptive, as an example, I'm going to ask about 2 different scenarios.
Okay.
A disruptive student who is then identified and is provided social work.
Yeah, social skills support.
Right?
Yeah, sure.
But it actually isn't the social support, but a challenge or some other thing that they need. So a high-performing student. Is there a way that they will be misidentified in this program? And in the same vein, a student who is not disruptive, but just recluse?
So the screener takes a look at both children. So one of the things that we recognize is it's easier for school staff to realize when a child who is disruptive is having difficulty. We do know that we are more likely to miss students who are struggling with worry or sadness. And this gives us an opportunity to focus on both types of children, or children in both of those areas. So we think that's one of the benefits of it, is that we're going to accurately screen in those children who need support. And it's going to be more efficient.
And will parents and family be able to see what the screening is? What questions are asked, how they look at children?
We haven't considered that. I'd have to check and see if there's any reason why the test publisher wouldn't want the questions publicized without there are certain evaluation tools, tests that we use that you can only purchase if you have the proper credential, and we're not allowed to show the items to other people who aren't credentialed. So I just have to check on that. I hadn't thought of that question. Yep.
What about inattentive students?
Yep, they'll be screened in also.
It sounds to me like that you have sort of this checklist for the teachers to look at from the beginning.
Yes.
And I guess my thought is that not all teachers have a psychology background,
Yeah.
A counseling background, and they are, not they're going to be biased on the whole thing, but it doesn't seem that that is their profession. That's not something that, you know, they studied and went to school for. I mean, like you, for example, it's a little bit different. So to me, I see a little bit of it's my first reaction to the whole thing, is that, I don't know how to feel about it.
We recognize that, and the creator of the screening tool recognizes that. So one of the things that we have in place is we would go through the process, and we've actually already done that at a faculty meeting here at Chapman. We went through the process of what areas or what behaviors should the teachers focus in on as they go through the screening process, and give an explanation of what to look for, so that the teachers recognize that, and they have a better awareness of what's important and what's not important for them to be aware of as they screen students through the process.
And tell me if I'm wrong, Chris, but when we researched this particular tool, this is the tool that was designed for teachers to use in the school system,
Yeah.
not for practitioners to use.
Yeah. This is a tool that was designed for classroom teachers who know their students well to be able to use. It's considered the gold standard for this type of screening.
Questions. One is, what is the timing on this? So when are we going to roll out the initial testing? And then based on your findings, when are you what's your timeline for calling parents and getting children additional help? And then my part 2 question is that if you're talking about using in-house, group staffing on hand, how does that, it sort of, I want to make sure it doesn't take the resources away from children who need other help. So let's just say something, happens, divorce in their house or death, and I know that they've been wonderful in helping out with children with, situations like that as well. So if we're going to do this and then not add additional resources, does that take away from some other kids that need, some help for maybe a few months, or friendship groups and a bunch of other things that, we do here?
The first question about the timing would be, we're not going to, the first piece that we need in place is we need parents to opt into the process. So we began sending notices home in February, or January?
No, it was February, I believe.
Okay, or the first week of February. And so far, we have 350 students. We've gotten 70 or so. 77 parents have opted in. So 77 parents opting in isn't enough for us to move forward with the process. So that was one of the reasons we wanted to speak to this group tonight, was to provide more information about what we're looking to do here. We don't know why parents haven't opted in. There's a couple of guesses. One is that parents don't want their children to participate. We like to think that's not the case, but that could be. If that's the case, then we'll recognize that. The other could be that parents didn't see the notice. We know that happens. Another piece could be that parents got the notice and didn't think they had enough information. And if that's the case, then that's why we wanted to do this presentation tonight. That's why we asked Mike to come by and record it, so that Marlene can upload this information onto the Chapman website so that parents can take a look at this. Then we would, depending on how late in the school year it is that we get enough people to opt in, we could either start providing services in the fall or at the end of this school year. And then the thought would be that we would, moving forward, do the screener 2 or 3 times a year, similar to how we screen reading and math skills, which we do now 3 times a year. In terms of the resources, you know what, we have the resources we have, and it's our responsibility to make sure those resources are matched with the students who need them the most. And so we have to prioritize our resources just like any business or agency does. And so one of our thoughts is, we have the resources, maybe they're not getting to the right people at the right time. And so that's an adjustment that we'll have to look to make. And if we see that more resources are needed, then it's our responsibility to go to the Board of Ed and say, here's a need that we didn't realize we had, but we've collected this data and now it's become evident that we need to make an adjustment in how we're allocating resources in the district. But that we can't do that until we have the information. So that's part of it. And so to that point, some people say, well, you shouldn't do this because you might not have the resources to provide the services. That doesn't seem like a good reason not to find out if there's a need. You know, if we recognize there's a need, then we go and get the resources, rather than hoping there isn't a need and not getting resources. That would seem irresponsible.
You're screening for these. It's not like math or science. You know, you can see, okay, the kid knows how to do 5 + 5.
Mm-hmm.
But to identify anxiety or stressors, those are more private.
Mm-hmm.
What type of confidentiality is there in the screening process, but then out toward services? Like through the whole process, I think the whole thing is very private and personal.
Yeah. So all information that we keep on students is confidential. So it doesn't matter if a student has an IEP or not. Student information is confidential and can't be released unless a parent gives permission for it to be released. So the only people who see information on a student are staff members who are working with a student, so a classroom teacher, or if a student's in an upper grade where he or she has 3 or 4 teachers because they switch classes, then each of those teachers has access to the information. But a 6th grade teacher doesn't have access to information about a 2nd grade student. Only teachers who work directly with students have the information. So all information is considered confidential and is not shared. If a student is going to get more support, so for instance now if a student is getting extra reading help, well, that person who's providing the extra reading support is going to have access to the child's data. And in the case of how a student's doing emotionally and behaviorally, the staff member providing extra support would have access to that data that said this is a child who needs to have extra support. But it's not going to be a situation where more information is going to be broadly shared, particularly personal information.
So we'll not follow them each year? Each year they'll be screened again?
Yes. And Marlene and Stacy, our school psychologist, will know the history of students.
That's I think the point that she was making.
Yeah.
That it's with mental health, there's been a stigma in our,
Yeah.
not just our town or our state.
It's societal.
It's societal.
Yeah,
There's
very
a,
societal.
and it hasn't gotten better.
And that's a piece that we're trying to take on more responsibility for, trying to reduce that stigma. You know, it's important for us and as members of school faculties to recognize that, yes, some students in our classrooms are going to have difficulties with how they're doing emotionally and behaviorally. And that's something that we as a district have gotten very good at, not devaluing a child because of that, or devaluing a young person because of that.
Exactly. It's
the
not.
kids are very aware, so I know.
One of the
I
things,
know, like, you know, the kids will, my daughter's come home and said, oh, yeah, there's someone who gets extra reading help. And
Mhm.
it's not that she thinks it's a negative, she knows it's just part of, you know, the kids have different pieces of
Yep.
their days, but I would be concerned that this would become a label that would travel with the child indefinitely. And then
Even
maybe
as
it
they
wouldn't
leave
be a
school.
finite experience that would end at the end of the school year and be reevaluated, but kids pick up on everything.
and one of the things that we're trying to work toward is that if someone has a physical health difficulty that people know about and we're providing them support for, or if someone has an emotional health difficulty that we're providing them support for, that they shouldn't be afraid to ask for help in either situation. A situation that we've noticed that's been very helpful for us at the high school level is a lot of children, young people who are struggling in this area, we find out about because their friends come forward and say, I'm worried about my friend who's written this or said this, or just doesn't seem like themselves. And because of that concern that young people are able to voice and not look at as stigmatizing,
Right.
we're able to reach out and get support to teenagers that we otherwise wouldn't. And it's interesting that it seems that young people see less of a stigma than adults do when it comes to situations like this. But we do think that this is an opportunity to start to reduce the stigma. So and we reduce the stigma by identifying children who need support and giving it to them, rather than thinking, I think that child might need some support, but I don't want to say anything because people might feel bad if we do. We want to say something to give them the support so that they'll make progress and not have a lifelong difficulty, but have a short-term difficulty.
Where are the results going to be stored? Will they be in their CUME files and follow them?
No, the results will be stored, the CUME file is a file that has SBAC scores in it and report cards and those types of things. So this screening information, because it's, as you said, more sensitive information, that was going to be kept with our principals and our counselors. Right. Well, we're going to hold on to that because we want to see if students are making progress year over year if we're providing them with services. But the data of this particular child is meeting with the school counselor once a week, that's going to be the counselor's file. And that's going to be particular to the counselor. So that information about what happens, say, in counseling session or in a social skills group session, that's not going to be shared broadly with anyone. I think that might be easier.
No, it was more about when the screening happens for all, the universal screening happens for all students, just like the SRI for all students.
Okay.
And so when we would come in for a conference, we would hear, this is your student's score, this is where they are, and this is where they're expected to be at the end of the year, that sort of thing. So do we get any feedback on that in terms of the behavioral, emotional, and social?
No, what we're going to do is we're going to share that information with parents if their child is screened at an elevated level and in need of support.
Only, so
Right.
others won't get arranged, like this is a little bit worrisome, or,
Correct.
okay.
Yep. Yep.
But as a parent, I would want to know if my child's in that 1 through 5 or whatever number that is, because I would want to step in now, because I don't want to next year them to be the number 1 slot. I want to know now, so I can just, maybe you don't want to provide the service, maybe I would want to go do it on my own, because if that were my daughter or son, I would do that.
Okay.
So why wouldn't we know that?
We hadn't considered that. That's that's something we could consider doing. The way the screening tool is designed, that's not a piece of it. And that's how this has been implemented in other places. But that's something, I mean, we could make a decision here to do that piece a bit differently. So that's something that we could consider.
How will you measure the success of of what, with
Oh,
that individual
yeah.
student?
The same screening instrument, I mentioned the questionnaire that teachers will complete, that can continue to be completed every 3 to 6 months. And so we'll see if there's changes in those cut scores as time goes on. So it'll be based on observations and then ratings of how the child is doing.
So they should be improving or getting
Yeah.
either, okay, and if they don't?
So that'd be similar to a child who comes up as a concern with reading skill.
Okay.
And we put interventions in place and see if they're making progress. If they don't, then we intensify the intervention. And if they still don't, we intensify the intervention. We would do the same thing with regard to these skills.
Somebody may have asked the first part of this, but do you opt in every year? And then can you opt out at any point in the process?
So the process will be, yes, opting in each year.
Okay.
We think that's the best way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see how that goes. Our hope is that eventually, if parents are comfortable with this process, that it will become as commonplace as vision screening and hearing screenings.
Yep.
And but since it's new and there is some sensitivity with it, we feel this is the best way to get started. And we did, have some long conversations about should we do opt-in or opt-out, and we decided to go with the opt-in, given the newness of it. And so that's how we're operating now. But 5 years from now it may be different.
Mm.
One thing that I think may make parents a little more comfortable is if they know they're going to get feedback either way.
Mhm.
So that's just something to consider. I think
Yeah,
really,
based on the discussions tonight,
Yeah.
we're
I
starting to
think it's
realize
really
that.
exciting because I think early intervention is very important. So I think this is exciting that Cheshire's taking this on. And the other piece that I was thinking about, I think teachers often know that all these things are concerns and they don't have a forum to say it or data to prove it because they're often things that aren't tangible. So I think that if we have this in place, it's going to allow teachers to have conversations with parents that may have been a little more difficult in the past, when they didn't have, as you were saying before, because they didn't feel comfortable having them or didn't have the data to support it. So I think in many ways it is going to be able to help teachers, help students move forward. So for that, I'm happy to.
Yeah, we had the same thought, so we're hopeful that that'll be the outcome as well.
I think the teacher probably don't need the tool to be able to point out the students, but I think that.
It quantifies it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yes.
Will teachers be able to recommend students that are not opted in for services because those children may be the most disruptive and their parents didn't opt them in? How did they get services for those? How do we get services for those children?
Right now, we're providing a broad range of support for children with emotional or behavioral needs in all of our schools, and we're not doing a screening. So yes, children will continue to get services whether we do this program or not. Our thought is that there may be children who we're not identifying because we're not doing the screening in a systematic and consistent way. The piece though is if a parent doesn't opt in, their child can't be part of any selection by a teacher to be more closely considered using the screening tool. So just to be clear, if a parent doesn't opt in, their child is not being considered in any of this process.
Which doesn't help what you're talking about, which is that the most needed the kids who need it the most are not part of the program.
Well,
They may not be if their parents don't.
they may not be
Well,
screened,
they're not able to be.
but that doesn't mean that we're not going to if there's a very blatant concern, it's going to be hard for us not to notice that. So we'll try to intervene in some other way. Does that make sense?
Those students probably are already getting services through the school,
They might
I
be.
would think.
But again, there is a subset of children who are struggling in a not so visible way. And we want to do our best to make sure that we get support for everyone. There are also, there will be times when we can speak to a parent and say, here's our thought. And the parent might not be fully on board with letting us provide support for their child. But if we have clear data based on the screening tool, that might help a parent to recognize what we see a little bit more readily and help that parent to say, yes, it's okay for you to provide some extra support to my child.
Are our schools getting extra money federally for participating in these programs?
Though this is a local program.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no strings attached to money.
Well, I mean, it would make sense in a
Mhm.
way that schools that would want to participate would then be able to get extra funding for those things if they're already willing to take the step to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that hasn't come. There's not a lot of money floating around out there these days. Any thoughts? Anything else, Marlene?
No, I think these were some really great questions, and I'm glad that you all came out tonight so that we had the opportunity to address some of the concerns and learn more about what some of the thoughts are
Yeah.
about this. So this was
And it's just some
great.
good suggestions for us to go back and consider some pieces we hadn't thought of yet, which is good. I mean, it's particular to our community, and in this case, particular to Chapman, but probably similar concerns that parents in other schools would ask. And it'll help us, to custom design what we're going to do here in Cheshire. So it'll be good.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was great.